I invite you to hear these words by my colleague, the Reverend Liz McClay, serving our congregation in Rhode Island in the States. As drops of rain that find each other and build to become a track, a rivulet, a stream, a river, a sea, so are we drawn together. So are we fortunate to find each other. So are we bound together on this shared passage toward an unknown ocean and eternity. 13 years ago, I was part of a UU Justice Ministries of California young adults tour to figure out where the water comes from and who has access and who has rights to water in the great state of California, and also to educate ourselves on the injustices around who has access to water and clean water and not. So we spent about a week traveling together. We went up and down the state. We went to dams and water purifying stations, and we learned so much. And there was also a moment built in there for a time for us to have a little bit of fun, right? Because we're talking about young adults. And again, if you do the math, I barely qualified as a young adult at that point, even by our liberal UU standards and definitions of what a young adult is, right? But nonetheless, I thought to myself, well, this part of the fun part of our trip together involves whitewater rafting. And I had never, ever done that before in my whole entire life, right? I was like, I don't know what to expect, but a lot of people seem to get into it. How many of you have been whitewater rafting? Wow, quite a few of you, right? So you know about the thrill of the adventure, and I didn't know what the various categories meant. All I know is that they told me it was going to be a category 4. And I thought, oh, okay, whatever that means. It's kind of in the middling, I guess. I don't know what the highest level is, but 4 should be okay, right? And then, so I got on the raft, and I was trying to figure out where to sit. That's the most important part from what I could, gather, right? And so I asked the rafter, I said, what's the best position for a newbie like myself? And he said, oh, sit towards the front. Some of you know where the story is headed, right? And so I did, and we were halfway through, and I was having a great time. I was like, wow, this isn't as bad. A little bumpy here and there, but not too bad at all. So by the time we got to the middle of our route, guess what happened? A certain person ejected off of his seat, went straight up into the air, and fell straight down into the water. I'm just glad I didn't hit any rocks. I'm just glad I didn't, hit the actual boat, and who knows what would have happened to the boat itself, right? And I just tried to remember the warning signs that the instructor gave us at the beginning of just stay in the water, be calm, and wait for the next raft to pick you up. Right? I was like, easy for you to say. When's that gonna be? And thankfully, there was a next raft. There was another raft, actually, here's the other thing that kind of made me feel more at ease, right? There were 2 boys on that raft, right? So I'm like, if 2 6 to 7-year-old boys could do this, I can too, right? It's when my ego kicked in, and I thought, yeah, I could do this. So I waited for them, and they did pick me up. And by the time we got back to the bus was going to drive us back up the river again for a round 2, right? And I thought, oh my gosh, do I really want to do this? Because my heart was pounding so fast, and there was both the thrill of the adrenaline rush of getting in that water and finally being rescued by another raft, and what's going to happen the next time, though, right? And I don't know, but why not? I'm here, might as well go for it. So I hopped on the raft again, round 2, and phew, this time around, I made it through safely all the way to the end of where we were supposed to get off. The second raft, however, remember the one with the 2 boys who are not part of our group, but part of another group? Their raft actually flipped over right around the halfway point, right, of where I was ejected. So I was thinking, oh my gosh, are they gonna be okay? Because we kept getting reports once we got to our destination about what's happening with the raft, who's going to save the boys, and the rest of the rafters, right? Because the rest of them figured out a way to swim out of the raft to the side of it and onto safety. And again, they sent another raft over to pick them up, right? But the 2 boys, from what I heard, were stuck inside the raft. And thankfully, there's an air pocket inside the raft so that at least they could breathe and wait until somebody comes and rescues them. So the minutes seemed like hours as we were waiting anxiously to hear about the safety of these 2 kids. And finally, word got back to us that they were indeed rescued, and we all had a reunion by the bus and the shuttle that took us back to the beginning of the route. So that story did have a happy ending, and so my colleague and I, her name is the Reverend Lindy Ramsden, who was the leader of our trip, decided that we would ask the parents if the 2 ministers in the bus could sit by the kids and just provide them with some sort of presence. And so we did sit next to them on the way back, and they were clearly rattled, they were shaking, and they were scared, and they were wet, and they were cold. But through it all, it's hard to figure out, and I don't even remember at this point what words we said to them, but just by being present with them, I believe, provided them with a sense of comfort so that by the time they got back, it wasn't as bad as when they were initially rescued from within the raft. That's my river story. So it's kind of a mixed bag. And by the way, this image is not taken from that trip. These are canoes, not rafts, right? And that water is clearly very still. I would say that's about a category 2 or 3, right? And I wouldn't even consider what we went through a category 4. It was more like a 4.5 or even 5 in my thinking, right? And so what's the lesson for me here? And the biggest one I learned is that once I got on that raft, I had very little control over what was going to happen. Again, I surrendered control to the rafters, right? They were the experts, and I get that I did sign that liability waiver saying I wouldn't sue them, but they would still have my best interest and my safety on the top of their heads, right? And in their mindset, I would think that they would like me to end up alive on the other side. And so I realized that while I may not have any control over what happens, I did have a certain level of control and choice around whether to get on the raft or not, and especially that second time around. And so I didn't have any control over the river, and that's what taught me to actually have a healthy fear of nature, right? Because Mother Nature is going to do what she's going to do, and it may be a category 4, maybe higher, who knows, right? I have very little control over external factors. The second thing I figured out from that trip is the power of community and how community saves us time and time and time again, right? And that raft that saved me, the second raft that saved me, and the community that saved those 2 kids, and even our impromptu UU community providing spiritual care for those 2 kids on that shuttle bus on the way back to the beginning of our route. And lately, I've been thinking about the times in my life where I've been thrown off the raft, metaphorically speaking. And literally speaking, this past summer was a major transition for me in my life. I was thrown off the raft called the US of A, and I landed here in Toronto, Canada, right? That's a major transition and a major life change. And I had no idea how to handle your bureaucracy. Let me just say that. I had just gotten used to the bureaucracy in the US, and one state to another, but Canada's bureaucracy is another thing completely, right? And so the biggest worry for me is I don't have any control over how this is all going to flow. What the Customs Border Patrol officers were going to ask me at the airport, and when I cross the bridge in Buffalo to here, I had no control over any of that. But what saved me over and over again was community. Your co-chairs, being on the phone with me on speed dial while I was at the airport, right? I was asking Chris, I'm like, can you email me back the receipt again? That seems to be the only hiccup at this point. I'm like, a freaking receipt? We got down to that? That's what they questioned me about? And they were both very supportive all along the way. And the CUC was a lot of help. And more importantly, I leaned on colleagues when I got here. And I still remember what the Reverend Samaya Oakley, who is the co-chair of the UMOC, the UU Ministers of Canada group, she emailed me, and after talking to me for a couple hours, and she used these words that ended with a period each time, which are you, period, are, period, not, period, alone. 4 extremely powerful words that all of a sudden let down my guard and lowered my anxiety level to a degree where I felt held and I felt like I was part of a larger community, a love that will not let me go. So perhaps today you are experiencing something turbulent in your life, in this whitewater rafting adventure on our blue boat home, right? I don't know what that may be, but I'm glad you showed up today. And I'm glad you trusted in the power of this community to help pull you through. And I hope that you get the message here today that you are not alone. And so this is an invitation as we engage in this process of ingathering, our first Sunday together as the first U community, right? Of how are we supposed to be on this raft together? And if you are even concerned about whether you want to continue this journey or not, because it's been rocky enough the past 3 years, right? Going from location to location and having all the sense of uncertainty and lack of control and not knowing where the flow is even going to be. But today, you are here. So will you jump on this raft with me? Will you take my hand? Will you come along for the ride, as adventurous and as rocky as it may be moving forward? Because there's no guarantees, folks, that the water is going to look like this, right? The only guarantee we have is that we are going to be sojourners together. Are you ready for this adventure? Yes? Are you ready along for this ride? Are you ready to invite others along the raft with us? I'll take your word for it, and I'm going to hold you up to it, because in a few minutes here and for the next few weeks, we're going to have an opportunity to walk around neighborhoods, and I'm going to have you all invite your friends for this walk so that they too could experience this river that we call Unitarian Universalism. May it be so.